Hello and welcome to the Hail Mary GPP podcast for NFL Week 14. I'm Big Italy 42. He is Josh Shepardson at BChad50, talking about some of your top plays here. And first one should come as no surprise. One of the hotter quarterbacks in the league, Ben Roethlisberger, against the Bengals. Team total is just 23, but we've seen this story before. We saw the first game was supposed to be a shootout between these two teams. It ended up being a defensive battle, but Roethlisberger clearly was not 100% in that game. So this is a situation where this offense is firing on all cylinders. Bengals missing Adam Jones on the defense. Both teams should be able to put up plenty of points in this one, and certainly on the Pittsburgh side, it starts and ends with Ben Roethlisberger.
Yeah, and the fact that, and you nailed that, both teams should be able to score in this contest is big. I mean, granted, Pittsburgh hung a big number. You got all the fantasy points you needed last week in a blowout. Usually it doesn't quite work that way. You need the other team to tango, so to speak. You need them to keep up. You need the scores to keep coming. And I expect that to be the case this week. And as far as Big Ben being hot, he's got 4 straight games of passing for 330 yards or more. And he's averaged 338.4 yards passing per game so far this year. So he's putting up big numbers. Has 10 touchdowns in that 4-game stretch, so he's really rolling. But one pleasant surprise was that he was under 7% owned in the FanDuel Thursday mini dive. So really, that's gravy. I mean, I would have liked him if he was owned on twice as many rosters. I figured he'd be popular, but he actually lagged behind some of the other quarterbacks, which was a bit surprising. So really liking Ben, really liking all of his weapons that he has. I mean, no shortage of receivers to throw to. Even Marcus Wheaton's looking like a competent receiver these days. So definitely has some weapons to work with. And as you noted, Adam Jones ruled himself out. That's really good news for Antonio Brown and for Big Ben.
Yeah, absolutely. And then next up, another guy who's been really hot recently, Tyrod Taylor, kind of now force-feeding the ball to Sammy Watkins, LaShawn McCoy, providing him with a competent running game and a weapon through the air as well in the short passing game. And, I mean, Tyrod with his ability to scramble and run and add points on the ground. We've seen him have big upside as well before. Facing off against a Philly team that, I mean, yes, last week they beat the Patriots, but still didn't play great as a defense. This is not a good defensive unit, and Tyrod certainly more than capable of putting up big numbers against them.
Yeah, you noted he's a really good scrambler, and maybe my perception is a little bit off, but it doesn't feel like you hear Tyrod Taylor's name mentioned amongst the elite running quarterbacks. I mean, it's always Cam Newton, Russell Wilson, and I get it. But Taylor's averaging over 30 yards rushing per game himself. That's right in line with what Cam and Wilson are doing. He has 3 touchdown rushes. He's taking care of the football with just 4 interceptions this year. Scored 20 total touchdowns, 3 rushing, 17 passing. So he finds the end zone. And he's got a great matchup with the Eagles this week. The Eagles are allowing just chunks and chunks of yards. They've allowed the 9th most passing yards per game at 258.8 and the second most passing touchdowns at 28. They've also allowed the 6th most rushing yards per game at 124.7. So, I mean, you're talking about over 380 yards of offense allowed per game by this Eagles defense. That's a lot of point potential for a guy like Taylor who can beat a team through the air and with his legs. So I know Shady's getting a lot of the attention in this game, rightfully so. Love him this week. But Taylor's another guy who can put up big numbers himself.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on board with that play. Nice little contrarian play that probably shouldn't be all that contrarian. Devontae Freeman next up, obviously 1 week removed from missing some time due to a concussion, but it was back last week. Didn't do a lot on the ground, but had 10 catches. So this is a guy that, especially with Julio Jones matching up with Josh Norman this week, this is a guy that Atlanta, they've been running their offense through him. They're going to continue to do that, especially this week with a tough matchup for Julio. And if we see Freeman actually have some success on the ground this week, which he could, because Carolina has a good defense, but they haven't been phenomenal against the run. Freeman can certainly make plays in all different ways, and you easily expect 20-plus touches for him this week.
Yeah, and usually you see 7.5-point spread, and you write off the underdogs running. I mean, in many instances, you just write them off because game flow is terrifying. You worry they're going to have to pass to play catch-up. But in this case, it's actually a positive. The Panthers have allowed the 4th most receptions to running backs this year. Devontae Freeman is the best receiving back in the league, at least by statistically speaking. I mean, maybe you could make an argument going to the film, but I'm going to defer to the experts there. But Freeman's been great this year, averaging 5.3 receptions per game, 45.3 receiving yards per game, has 2 receiving touchdowns. And as you noted, he can have success on the ground too, which obviously elevates his ceiling. Real nose for the end zone. tied the league lead in rushing touchdowns with Adrian Peterson. Peterson obviously has the extra game from last night, but also Freeman did miss a contest. So all the more impressive that Freeman's still tied for the league lead in rushing touchdowns with 9, but only 2% owned in the FanDuel mini dive. And you should be able to get an elite talent like Freeman who can score as many fantasy points as he can at that low of an ownership rate. I mean, even in a bad matchup, I would expect him to be at least 5% owned just based on ceiling alone. And anytime you get under that, like, I fall in love with a player like that. So really liking Devontae Freeman this week, really liking the matchup with the Panthers and the fact that game flow could actually work to his advantage, even though it doesn't think it would. And kind of hammering that point home, the Panthers have allowed 75 receptions to running backs this year. That's 6.25 per game. So, I mean, at DraftKings, if Freeman just hits the running back average for receptions allowed, he's starting off with a touchdown. He's starting off with 6 points.
Yeah, that's a good point right there. And then next up, a guy who's going to be low-owned, is always low-owned, Amir Abdullah, the guy who was supposed to be, the feature back for the Lions at the beginning of the season. Obviously, was always going to split some time with Joique Bell, but this is their best runner, most talented runner they have on the team, and finally starting to get more looks in the offense. And he's a guy that can make big plays, and not exactly the ideal matchup here, but this is a game where the Lions, somehow this is right around to pick them. I just don't see any way that the Rams, especially the way the Lions defense is playing, keep this game that close. So I expect Abdullah to get himself plenty of work in this one.
Me too, and his work's trending in the right direction. I mean, he's gotten more work lately. He's worked his way out of the doghouse. As I note in the article, he's actually set single game rushing highs in the last 2 contests. Now, sounds a lot more impressive than it is. 63 rushing yards in week 12, 67 in week 13. But still, he's moving in the right direction. He's getting more carries. He's looking good carrying the football. And with the Lions realistically out of it, they're not making the playoffs. There's no reason to continue to feed zombie Joique Bell. He's been terrible this year. Get the ball to Amir Abdullah. See what you have. You spent a second-round pick on the guy. He's looked good of late. And while this would have been a bad matchup at the beginning of the season when the Rams defense was clicking on all cylinders, they have slipped and slid down the rankings. They've allowed the 10th most rushing yards per game at 116.3, and the 7th most DraftKings and FanDuel points per game to back. So Abdullah has what actually looks like a plus matchup now, which seems crazy after the beginning of the year. But good matchup. I expect him to get the football. And like you, I don't see this game being all that close. I know it's basically a pick-em. Lions opened as a 1-point underdog on the road, but Case Keenum is not an NFL caliber quarterback. The Lions are allowing under 60 yards rushing per game since their bye week. So, I mean, their bread's buttered with Todd Gurley running the football. And if he's trying to run into a defense that's not allowing yardage, I don't see how they're going to be able to keep up pace with the Lions. Even though the Lions aren't putting up a ton of points themselves, they've got a better offense right now than the Rams do, plain and simple.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like everyone does, and I mean, it doesn't matter who it is, Nick Foles, Case Keenum, I mean, they're both just god-awful down there, and even with Todd Gurley, you really can't even get him involved, so I just, obviously we've kind of gone more onto the defense now, but, so yeah, if you're not playing the Lions defense, get some Lions defense, but Abdullah is the most talented back in this offense, either way.
Yeah, and game flow is going to work in his favor if things go according to our plan as opposed to the odds makers' plans and the Lions race out to a lead. It's going to be the Abdullah show milking the clock instead of Theo Riddick as the pass-catching back.
Yeah, absolutely. And then next up we got A.J. Green, obviously, in that same game with Bengals Steelers, one of the higher totals of the game, or the week, I should say. And he has had massive target totals in his last 5 games against the Steelers. I mean, throughout his career, it's been A.J. Green's our guy. You're going to get him the ball against the Steelers because he's the guy that's going to help you win the game. And the Steelers don't have any corners that are capable of slowing down or stopping A.J. Green in this matchup.
Yeah, there are many cornerbacks in the league that can slow down or stop A.J. Green, and the Steelers don't have anyone even close in that discussion. My lineups are going to sink or swim with the Steelers game this week. Got a ton of exposure. Green is a big piece of that. Love his ownership rate, just over 11% in the Thursday mini dive on FanDuel, and that lags behind both Antonio Brown and Martavis Bryant. piece of this game because it's lower owned than the other high ceiling guys in it. And Green doesn't have as much competition for targets and touches as Brown and Bryant. Obviously, there's Wheaton, D'Angelo Williams, and it's basically Green and Eifert, Marvin Jones a little bit. But and A.J. Green had 11 receptions for 118 yards and a touchdown grab earlier in the season on 17 targets. And 17 targets and 11 receptions were both season highs. He's carved up the Steelers in the past, carved them up already this year. And Football Outsiders ranks the Steelers 26th defending number one. So it's not even like they can't stop A.J. Green. They can't stop any number ones this year. And A.J. Green's one of the elite number ones in the league. They've coughed up over 275 yards passing per game, and they've allowed the fifth most fantasy points to receivers on DraftKings and FanDuel so far this year. So it is just a plus matchup for Green. Really loving what he can do this week.
Yeah, absolutely. Massive upside for him there. Next up, Eric Decker. This Jets passing attack quietly been one of the better in the NFL with Decker and Brandon Marshall. Obviously, Brandon Marshall, the guy that a lot of people flock to as the high upside guy, but Decker gets red zone looks. He gets looks between the 20s. And, I mean, the Titans are not a good defense. Really, their main strength on defense is the fact that they slow down the pace on offense and, try to keep the game, shorten the game, I guess I should say. But they've been able to score points at times. And really, I mean, the only negative you can think really with Decker here is the fact that the Titans just don't score against the Jets defense and that the Jets don't need to throw the ball.
Yeah, the biggest concern with Decker is game flow. I'm actually inclined to think that the Titans make this a closer game than the odds makers have it. 7.5 point spread in favor of the Jets, but Mariota's playing really good football, and I do think he poses some problems. I mean, he is a rookie on the road, so there definitely is a blowout potential there. But if the game stays close like I expect, you'll see Fitz passing the ball into the fourth quarter, and that's good news for Decker, who should get looks throughout the game, won't be killed by a game flow kill in the second half if the Jets were to get up. And as you noted, Decker's been a model of consistency this year, has a nose for the end zone, has caught a number of touchdown passes this year, and he's also been good for yardage. I mean, 60 yards receiving or more in 7 straight games, and he's caught 4 more passes in 10 of 11 contests this year. So he's just rock steady week in and week out. That's not to say that he's just a high floor guy. He does have a high ceiling, too, with this matchup. It's a good one for him. The secondary really isn't good for Tennessee. Much better against the run than against the pass. So you'd actually think the Jets would have maybe a more pass-happy approach this week since there hasn't been a lot of success on the ground against the Titans this year. So why, bang your head against the wall when you could beat them through the air?
Yeah, that's a great point there. And then next up, Allen Hurns, a guy who obviously recency bias. He didn't play last week. Allen Robinson had a monster game with 3 touchdowns. Going to see huge ownership for him, of course. And then next up, you look at the ownership here for Allen Hurns. You mentioned 4.3%, and we all saw what the Colts allowed to the Steelers last week. Jags pass first, then pass second, then usually pass third attack as well. So Allen Hurns going to step right back in there and be the quiet guy that no one's really looking at that's been productive all year long.
Yeah, he's the other Allen for the Jaguars. I mean, they say the Allen brothers, but it really just feels like the Allen Robinson show on the view of the DFS gamers right now. 19.1% ownership was the second highest ownership rate in the Thursday FanDuel mini dive at receiver from what I saw, and that was for Allen Robinson. As you noted, Hurns checked in with less than a quarter of the ownership rate of his teammate. Really nice stack partner with Blake Bortles in this soft matchup. The Colts, beyond Vontae Davis, their secondary is dreadful. They don't have enough other NFL caliber cornerback, maybe even NFL caliber, like rosterable cornerback on their roster. And somebody's going to be stuck guarding Allen Hurns. And by guarding, I mean trying to guard Allen Hurns because I don't see anyone matching up well with him. The Colts have just been crushed through the air, have allowed the 5th most passing touchdowns and the 3rd most passing yards per game this year. 280.4 yards allowed through the air this season. It's a lot of yardage given up, and that leaves plenty of upside for both Hurns and Rob. Even if you like Robinson, that doesn't mean that you should immediately dismiss Allen Hurns because Hurns can still have a big game with Robinson. They've both had big games together throughout the year, and Hurns has been a big play machine. 15.8 yards receiving this year, and he had a nice 7-game streak of touchdown grabs from week 3 through week 10. So again, another one of these rock steady guys like Eric Decker, who's consistent from week to week, but also has quite a bit of upside.
Yeah, definitely a guy that you want to keep on your radar there for low ownership. Next up, a guy who, with battling injury, looks like he's on the right side of being able to play here. Same game as earlier, as you could tell, this is a prime spot for offense. Tyler Eifert leading the league in touchdown catches there for tight ends, and 12. Also, just so happens to be a matchup against the Steelers team that really struggles against the tight end. So this is going to be a spot here once again where, as you mentioned earlier, both teams are going to be throwing the ball a lot, going to be a lot of scoring, and you got to imagine that the two guys who score most of the points for the Bengals, Tyler Eifert and A.J. Green, both going to be pretty heavily involved.
Yeah, and it's funny that we go from talking about a guy who's had a nice 7-game touchdown streak to going to the tight end who leads the league in touchdown receptions. Eifert's been a red zone monster this year. The Steelers have not had an answer for tight ends this year, giving up touchdowns, giving up yardage. And this is a game where the Steelers have been very good against the run. So I expect that when the Bengals get in the red zone, you're not going to see a lot of Jeremy Hill. You're not going to see a lot of Giovanni Bernard. It's going to be Tyler Eifert and A.J. Green, and I think both can have big games together. Obviously, that means that Andy Dalton is capable of having a big game, but this is a really good matchup. Back and forth, I think scoring affair this time. Unlike last time when Big Ben was rusty and maybe Andy Dalton still had a monkey to get off of his back against the Steelers, winning a big game, getting a big win on his resume this year. I think he's going to be a little bit more freewheeling this game. Also at home, which should help Dalton a bit. And again, both teams should score a bunch of points, and that means that you want pieces of this game. And I like the ownership rates on Eifert and Green. Eifert, I almost wonder if his ownership rate is a product of people holding the first game against the Steelers against him. Really didn't have a big game in that contest. Was targeted 8 times, but was mostly quiet with just 4 receptions for 39 yards and no touchdowns. So if people are holding that against him, shame on you. Steelers haven't really been able to hold tight ends down this year. That looks like a fluky performance, keeping Eifert in check. And really, Eifert kept Eifert in check, if I remember correctly, with some drops that were pretty catchable footballs that he'd normally reel in most weeks. And I don't see that being the case again.
Yeah,
this week where he's going to be dropping catchable passes.
Yeah, and definitely one of those catches was a see how far you can run and see if anybody can catch you. So, I mean, it could have been a huge game there for him in that one. But either way, that's going to wrap things up for us for the GPP picks for Week 14. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out the rest of our great content at dailyfantasycafe.com.